morning, Angela. How are you today?
Good morning. Good to see you,
Yeah,
Alicia.
same here. Thank you so much for joining me with Designing Healthy Environments. I'm Alicia Ponce, founder and principal of AP Monarch. And here we are today speaking with you, Angela Tovar, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and earlier before we went live, we're talking about we're slowly going back to the office. How I have my slippers on, but you have to go fully dressed now.
Yes, the struggle is real, right? Remembering where all your work clothes are in your closet, and putting on pants that button, and taking your work shoes out of the closet. It's a whole transition. Just remembering how to do all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, almost 18 months, and here we are. And during this time, we've found a way to stay connected. The whole world has found a way to stay connected virtually and still doing amazing things. Before we get started, I just want to give a brief intro of your bio. Not that a lot of people, for those of you that don't know who Angela is, here's a little bit on Angela. So Angela Tovar has worked as a community planner, program manager, and climate and environmental justice advocate for over 15 years. In 2020, we were so lucky to have you appointed as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago by Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Angela has committed to centering the City of Chicago's climate and sustainability agenda on equity and mitigating environmental harm in Chicago's most overburdened and underserved communities. Wow. So, I mean, when we talk about, the environment, climate change, and making great, wonderful things, right? Sometimes, somewhere along those lines, these underserved communities get forgotten. Is that what you see? Like, tell us a little bit about your experience and your passion to serve in this area.
Yeah, I do think that that's what we see sometimes, right? And I think that that is both in our policy, and then also just with mainstream environmentalism, right? Sometimes we are so hyper focused on sustainability goals very broadly, but we also have to acknowledge that the baseline is different for folks, right? That folks are coming into these challenges related to climate change, or just some of the environmental challenges that we have as a city from a different place. And so if communities already have lingering health issues, or disparities in housing conditions, right, or lack of access to transportation, then there are challenges that we have to overcome. And sometimes those challenges are also compounded by the impacts of climate change, right? And so when we think, for example, about poor air quality, yes, we do have poor air quality everywhere throughout the city, right? I believe last July, we had 10 consecutive days of poor air quality, the worst that it has been in over a decade. And, so that is certainly felt throughout the city. But when we think about some of the existing conditions, right, high levels of asthma in some of our neighborhoods, higher volume of air pollution that impacts people, that has resulted in, respiratory, poor health outcomes, respiratory diseases, again, high rates of asthma, cardiovascular disease, that is going to disproportionately impact people in those communities, right? And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to be cognizant that people are starting at different places. And those are really tough conversations, right? It's been very, I think, not easy, but I think that, sometimes we think about climate and we frame that within the context of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And that's really, really important. We all know that climate change is real and we have to move rapidly to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But there's this whole other narrative here, right? Of communities that are facing existing environmental harms, that
Right.
climate change will disproportionately impact those communities. And how do we have those conversations, even if they're nuanced and they're hard and they're political and they're tough to talk about? We have to jump in, right? And we have to solve for those issues. And that means that, we have to face and acknowledge that there's a long history here, right? That there are issues related to zoning and land use that have led to a high concentration maybe of like pollution producing facilities in our communities, but we
Mhm.
can't ignore that. And we have to, you know, face that and address that as a city in order to, move everyone into this transition, um, this climate transition.
Right. And that's what I want to talk about. And so you have a mission here. What we're actually going to talk about is a green recovery, right? And the 4 strategies for a green recovery for the city of Chicago. So let's talk a little bit about, if you can talk about those 4 strategies. And, I just want to say, I oftentimes mention, for me, for example, I go back to my lived experience, right, where I grew up in, and just remembering, I used to run track and field, and just remembering that we would practice, uh, centered in or surrounded by industrial factories that really emitted these strong scents, uh,
Yeah.
and they were not good for you. And so, those lived experiences has brought me, for example, to look at how do we make change. And here we are today, speaking on some of those things. So what are the 4 strategies?
Yeah, and I will just start from a place, similarly, right? I mean, I grew up on the southeast side in the 10th ward as well, and and I lived. I don't want to age myself, but I was there still when the mills were operating, right? And in fact, the history. A lot of the folks that are from the southeast side, our history is that, you know, a lot of families either came up, a lot of African American families came from the South through the Great Migration to come and work in the mills. And similarly, a lot of families from Mexico were recruited to come
Mhm.
and work in the mills, right? And so that's my family's history as well. My family has been here since I believe like the 1930s. And we were one of many families that came to make that migration to work in the mills. And so when I was growing up, it was a similar situation, right? The mills and all of the pollution was just like a backdrop for our living, right? I mean, there were slag piles, there were, all of these materials that were handled that were a byproduct um, of steel production, right? That were happening in the neighborhood. And then that just changed so drastically. Our
Mhm.
whole economy there, and I'm going to get into the green recovery, but I think this is
Yeah.
just good
No,
context.
it's
Like
good
our
to.
whole economy was based on steel production, right? And that was the whole ecosystem. Steel production, generated the revenue and provided, good middle class jobs for people in the community. And when that was taken, the whole economy fell, right? And
Mhm.
so what was left over, that's a really extractive operation, right? So what's left over is just an abundance of brownfields, no more jobs for people. And then the smaller businesses that supported the community started to fall too, right? And I think that folks have overcome that in many ways. There's still a vibrant history on the Southeast side. There is still a number of people, there's still really great, wonderful small businesses, and it's still a wonderful place to raise children. But for a while, especially in the early 90s, when that transition was happening, right? And you saw um, a lot of families of color that stayed, right, and
Mhm.
were left behind because we didn't have the resources to transition or to move away or to find other jobs in other fields, right? And then people were just left and behind, and that is the story of many
Mhm.
extended family members that still live in the neighborhood. And so we are at a moment now as we think about our recovery, and just the past 18 months, as you said, of not just experiencing COVID, but also just all that has been unveiled, right? As we think about racial justice and social justice as well, and having these real conversations about what equity means to us. I think that this is just a moment for us to pause as the city of Chicago and say, what do we want our outcome to be here, especially within the context of environment and sustainability? And I think that that experience that I had, growing up is not unique, right? As you said, I mean, you have that same experience. And so as we think about, and we're having those conversations in many sectors, right? Our economic development team is talking about that. The city also has this infrastructure plan that we're unveiling as well. And so we're talking about jobs and prosperity. And the green recovery is essentially saying we can have that prosperity as well in within the context of environment and sustainability, right?
Yes.
And so how do we center our environment and sustainability work so that we can maximize community benefits, right? If we're thinking very thoughtfully about the outcomes of this level of investment of our work, we can ensure that jobs are available for folks. We can ensure that more training programs are available to folks. We can ensure, but we have to think more thoughtfully even beyond that, right? We can ensure that co-ownership opportunities are available to folks, community wealth building, right? We can pilot new models that allow people to own the infrastructure, right? We're seeing throughout the country so many really great examples of like community owned solar projects, for an example, right? Or just community owned infrastructure. We need to think about what those possibilities are for the city of Chicago. And so our green recovery agenda is just 4 strategies that we're putting forward this year. The first one is that the city is required to write a climate action plan. We had a climate action plan that we wrote in 2008. We've had a couple of updates. The city had a sustainability plan. The last administration put together a really wonderful resiliency plan, but we need to update our climate action plan, right? And that, as you know, is our strategy to think about how we reduce emissions. And so we've been really great in creating a greenhouse gas inventory, but we need a plan to just update what our goals are by 2050. And this is an opportunity to think very thoughtfully about equity. This is an opportunity for us to really work in coordination with communities to say, what does community level climate adaptation look like to you? And in this moment, right, where our frontline leaders are saying, we need a just transition, right? We want to see our communities move away from these extractive economies to these regenerative economies. How can we as the city really lift up and support that just transition that our frontline leaders are envisioning and are leading on, right? And so that's one of the 4. And Alicia, you've been involved with our building decarbonization work, right? And that is something that folks are doing around, cities around North America and all over the world really are looking at decarbonization strategies. And we know that that's a place where we can implement now. We don't have to wait for the climate action plan, because we know in the city of Chicago, 70% of our emissions come from the built environment in some ways. And that's not just the built environment as like the buildings are operating and emitting. That, is everything from the development of the materials, the transfer of the materials, and then the building operations themselves. But 70%,
Architecture
right?
2030 has said that, we're the amount of square feet that we're adding per month, right? It's 2.3 trillion square feet by the year 2060. And that's an equivalent of, a New York City per month.
Wow.
I'm wondering like what that number is in the city of Chicago, because, here in Illinois, right, it's getting very, very busy. And what are we building and how are we building it? I do want to say, I'm really excited that, in some of these neighborhoods, like the southeast side and where the steel mills were and the stockyards were, there are people coming to me to build, buildings that are, carbon neutral, that are unrenewable energy, and there are, bring community wealth, economic wealth. So it's happening. It's
Yeah.
happening. And just like you say, you're on the climate action plan and we can keep going. But yeah, let's see how we can push the envelope. And so you mentioned the building sector and, writing, we're just getting started, right? On looking at policy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll let you continue on that.
Yeah, and I'm so excited, that to be working with you and so many others that are thinking through this, right? And I think the point here is that we know the landscape of possibilities, right? There are so many things that the city could incorporate. Cities around the country have changed their code. Some people have, in order to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, for example, have prevented natural gas infrastructure from being built at the time of new construction. We have seen, just retrofit programs emerge to reduce energy consumption in existing buildings. We've seen, building performance standards, which is like the next level. We already require buildings over 50,000 square feet to benchmark. And the next step would be, do we want to require a building performance standard to require the buildings to perform more efficiently over time? So there's all of these best practices that we're learning from other cities. This is also the time where we have to acknowledge that as we are developing these strategies, we can't just frame this around like commercial buildings downtown, right? There are, and I know that you do a lot of really wonderful and innovative work in communities. And, there are anchor institutions and buildings in our neighborhoods. We have to be thinking about residential buildings as well. We have to acknowledge that not every building or a homeowner has the upfront capital to make this transition. We have to acknowledge that sometimes our intentions are good in that we've created like job workforce development programs to take on these works, but we've had a mismatch with really linking up those programs to the demand, right? And so there are all of these little nuances that we have to think about, and we can really use this as an opportunity to say, hey, we have some priority communities. We understand that there's aging housing stock out there. We understand that that there has been a historic barrier to participation in the clean energy economy for low-income communities and communities of color. How do we break through those nuances and create a buildings emissions reduction strategy that works for everyone?
Yeah, I'm glad
And
you
so
brought up workforce development, because how do you move beyond, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about engagement and outreach, right? And how does it make sense for my little family living in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, right? You have your high end intel, right? And then you have your families, right? But workforce development, I think, is key because oftentimes I've seen what other cities are doing. Hey, fill out this survey, we'll give you LED bulbs or a rain barrel, whatever that is. But Angela, how do you see us pushing beyond light bulbs? It's workforce, it's training, it's education.
yeah, I mean, it really is all of those things. It is education. I think that we have, and I will say that how we have started this process is we haven't been very prescriptive of what we want the outcome to be, right? We have spent so much time. We started this process actually back in September, and it has been a really robust stakeholder process. And I think the point of that has been, let's talk to our frontline leaders first, right? There are so many smart people in the city of Chicago that bring lived experience, that bring technical assistance. There are people that just bring the experience of designing buildings, that are passive houses or net zero, right? So we have all of these people in our ecosystem here in the city, and let's really tap into the expertise here. And also just acknowledge, again, going back to the eliminating those barriers to participation, we haven't really fully engaged everyone in these types of conversation always. So we started with having conversations one-on-one with frontline leaders just to really try to understand their vision, right? There are people out there that are thinking about this for their communities, right? There are frontline leaders, environmental justice folks that have been thinking about what a clean energy transition would mean for their community, and really understanding what that means, I think, has been important. And then, next we went to some of the broader like sustainability networks, to really lean in and to talk to folks in those spaces, just what the realm of possibilities were for the city. And then we spent the beginning of the year doing focus groups, right? Talking to designers, talking to tenants advocacy organizations, right? Talking to low income housing developers, talking to community organizations. We had a really wonderful dialogue with youth. And I was really excited about that conversation. People don't necessarily connect like, hey, should we have a youth dialogue about building decarbonization, right? But the built environment impacts everyone, right? And it's so important to capture their perspective too. We have so many wonderful youth leaders that are engaged in our climate work. And this is a real opportunity, right? To sort of tap into their perspective and to really understand what the possibilities are in this space. And so really spending time with people and understanding. And then now we're bringing folks back, right? We're asking folks to come back to the table to work with us. I believe that we have a good working group that represents people in different sectors, right? We didn't want to limit it to just design folks or building engineers. We really wanted this to represent Chicago, represent different communities and perspectives, to come back together to now say, these are our possibilities, both for policy, but we should also be thinking about what the supportive element of this project is. Are there financing mechanisms that are available to help support folks in this transition? We have a PACE program here in Chicago, but that is a commercial PACE program. And so we need to be thinking about how we can support other retrofits and enable those to happen here. And what programmatic efforts do we need, right? We learned some really great examples from like DC. They have and other cities that have like decarbonization building hubs, right? Where if you are a single family homeowner or, the owner of a 50,000 square foot building, you can walk in the door and get technical assistance and just learn about the realm of possibilities in this space for your project. And so, we need to think about what that support network is. And then, I think that, to your point, workforce development is a huge component of this as well, right? And we have talked to folks, City Colleges also has a really great program, and just leaning on their expertise and really learning about how we can support this as well from both the educational level, thinking about how our trade schools can support this transition, and then also just thinking about how we can work hand in hand with our workforce development folks.
Yeah, I mean, that would just be awesome. You started the discussion of how the economics was booming, right, with the steel mills. And so wouldn't that be great to just bring that full circle again, and just have it with renewable energy, and just continue to just make positive impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, so what's going on with the policies, where's the direction where you're headed with policy?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that will just sort of feed into the last two components of the recovery roadmap, right? Is that we have to keep going. These can't be the only two spaces that define this clean energy transition. And so as policymakers, like the two other projects that we're working on right now, and these is our electricity franchise agreement, right? For the first time in nearly 30 years, the city of Chicago will need to agree to an electricity franchise agreement that gives our electric utility the right of way to operate in the city, right? And this is a moment, again, this just happens to be coming to a head this year, right? We've been talking to ComEd. the mayor sent a letter back in September letting ComEd know that we have policy goals as the city of Chicago, right, for renewable energy,
Mhm.
for electrification, for support for electric bill cost reduction and assistance for our neighborhoods. We need to recognize, right, that there needs to be some infrastructure improvements that need to happen, programmatic investment, and really just workforce development, more workforce development opportunities. And we sent a letter in September to say, we would like to, in addition to coming to terms on a franchise agreement, to also come to terms on a parallel energy and equity agreement. And so we have been talking to ComEd, and then just more recently, we decided that we wanted to explore the energy landscape, right? That we wanted to, it's a due diligence for for our residents, for our communities, to really explore whether or not the agreement with ComEd after 30 years is the right agreement for the city. Or, and again, this is just a request for information and just really understanding what else is out there in the
Mhm.
world, right? Are there other innovative ideas? Are there other places where, or other and people are encouraged to respond to the RFI as well. It isn't limited to just utility operators, right? If
Mhm.
people have other ideas or approaches, um, they're welcome to respond as well. And so this is just really a moment for us just to understand both what a potential franchise agreement can look like, or within these policies that we've put forth, are there other things that we need to be thinking about as we approach this agreement with ComEd or with another utility, right? And
Mhm.
so this is just a moment to explore, right? And to
Yeah,
solicit that feedback and that
an
expertise from people
opportunity.
out there.
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity. How long is this RFP open for? Can
Right now, the RFP is open, the RFI is open
RFI?
for the month of May. And we will explore whether or not to extend the deadline.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, it's an opportunity that this is for all of you out there, definitely take advantage of this opportunity because we are making change here. Um, so you've talked about the climate action plan, you've talked about the zero net carbon buildings. So what are the other two strategies?
So the electricity
The
franchise,
RFP.
which we just talked about, right?
Mhm.
And then the last one is that, and this is building off a policy. In 2019, there was a resolution that was passed that committed the city to 100% renewable by 2025 for its municipal supply, and then 100% by 2035 citywide. And so picking up that plan, we have been working with our AIS department, with Commissioner David Reynolds and his team, and we released an RFP for the electricity supply contract for the city for our own municipal load. And a
Mhm.
provision of that contract is that 50% of the energy sources has to come from new renewable energy right here in the region. And so
Mhm.
we are in active procurement. So that's all I can say about that. But I will just say that, we received some really wonderful responses that included the possibility of renewable energy here. And we have also, another provision of that RFP was that we wanted people to bring ideas for community benefits, right? We just going back to all of the possibilities that you and I have talked about today with jobs and training opportunities and other investments in our community, we want to make sure that every investment in the energy space moving forward is linked back to community benefits, right? And so this is just another opportunity where we are working with, as we engage in this procurement process, we have encouraged the respondents to bring those ideas forward as well. And as we have moved forward through the process, we have scored those responses based on their ideas for community benefits.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, with policy, it's a delicate dance, right, of checks and balances. We want to make sure we're holding people accountable. We want to make sure that we're clear, efficient, and equitable. And so knowing that, I mean, and it's such a broad goal, but what are your, I guess, expectations, once from point here? If you could fast forward, what would you say a successful policy would be?
Um, yeah, I think that for us as policymakers, we can't, and I think that it's a practice, right? It's not easy work. I just went to an equity training workshop that I participated in for the whole month of April. And I was reminded in that workshop that equity is like yoga. It's a practice, right? It's not something that you can just take like one workshop on and think that like you know everything. It's something that you have to stretch. You have to work on it. It takes you can never stop learning about how to be better at creating more inclusive processes.
I
And
agree with you, Angela, but it's like where we're at, I feel like time is of the essence.
yes,
For sure, everything has its journey, but I feel like time is of the essence and we have to enjoy the journey, but let's take action.
yeah, and I understand that, and I know that that is always the push for people who understand the urgency of climate change. I feel that too, right? Every day, right? That's it, when in this line of work, as you know, that is the burden that we carry. But we have two outcomes here, right? And we've seen this play out. If you think about just the history of like renewable energy in this country, who has access to renewable energy at a large scale right now, right?
Mhm.
Is it people in our communities, or is it big utilities, or people that can make that level of investment? And so we have to create this balance where, yes, we understand the urgency and we're pushing forward as quickly as we can, but we also can't forget, we can't leave people behind, right? And we can't forget about what the possibilities can bring to our communities. And I think that that's the balance that we have to hold right now, right? And I think that the work that you have done in bringing like very intentional, high efficiency design to community based projects is the right is sort of the right approach, right? You know that you know how our buildings need to function to sustain ourselves in the long term, and you can take that expertise and weave it into community development projects that are happening now to say, hey, I'm building for our future, right? And so I think that yes, we have to move things along. We have to move towards implementation, which was one of the reasons why we moved forward with building decarb ahead of the climate action plan. We already know, right? we can look at best practices from other cities. We already know that 70% of our emissions come from
Right.
the built environment, so we can move ahead with that piece before we write the full plan.
Mhm.
And so yeah, but I think for me, good policy begins with engagement, and it creates an inclusive process, and then the end result is a policy that is important citywide but is really meaningful for people in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is that once you start to understand and see the co-benefits of everything, you know we don't just design a building, right? We like to create that ripple effect of how it impacts, not just that site, not just the block, not just the neighborhood, but how that extends outward. And so once you start seeing that, and we like to always try to connect those dots. This does have a reason. Oh, wait a minute. My right or my left hand does have movement because it's connected over here, right? I always like to use the anatomy of the body to explain how it's all interrelated and how we're doing it for our health. We're doing it for our human health and our environmental health. And
Yeah.
it's just when we're I just hope that, when we look at these policies, we're able to create these connections.
Yeah.
Hmm. And so, and keep us accountable. I love the accountability piece of it. It's just like, oh, we're just gonna do this over here, wipe our hands clean, and move on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
So we have to.
No, and that's right. And I think the beauty of engaging so many people on the front end is that people feel ownership of that and will hold the city
Yeah,
accountable, right? If you are co-creating the policy with us, if you're invested, if you have invested your time to be a part of this working group and to be co-owners on the drafting of these policies, they become yours. That's the beauty of democracy, right? And doing things in a more inclusive way is that we now own this together, and you can say, hey, look, I invested my time, my energy, I lent my expertise to you. This is you're a partner, right? And we change the dynamic so that folks in our neighborhoods and folks that have this technical expertise become our partners in this work, right? We're in this together. And I know that I don't mean to sound cheesy, but I really do mean that, right? Like
but we
we
are.
can
I mean,
build this group.
eventually we'll feel the impacts. We can build it and go this way, but eventually, I think that we will feel an impact, positive or negative. My question is how does one get involved? At the household level. I think we're pretty clear and we're good on at the professional level, especially if you're in this space. How could one get involved? Where does one go for information and resources?
Yeah, so I think that this is the moment where we have to really think more thoughtfully about how to engage folks, right? We certainly don't want to create policies or plans that don't meet people in their everyday lives, right? I still talk to folks in my own family who have, who aren't necessarily, really up on building decarbonization policies from around, the country, right? And so, but that's the real litmus test here, right? Where are there conversations? How can you tap into people's lived experience? Everyone knows the utility. Everybody understands climate change in a way. And really understanding folks from their perspective. And I think for us, we really have to think about those unique strategies to talk about this work, to engage in a dialogue, and to really, meet people in their communities and really talk about this work in a more meaningful way. That is going to be a challenge, right? Especially if now that we're in a virtual space. I
Mhm.
think that this summer you will see more ways for us to engage digitally on the city's website related to climate. We are going to be putting some information out there this week about how people can just talk about their relationship with the utility, and just, again, any ideas that people have about how we can improve their experience. We are, as part of We Will, which is the 5-year
Mhm.
citywide plan, we are going to be working with some really exciting artists and residents to talk about climate change. And again, just really understanding that these conversations should happen in community. They don't have to happen downtown or outside City Hall.
Yeah.
We can tap into artists that are doing work in communities and really work with them to engage in dialogue about climate change or
Sure. Oh, I
energy.
love that. Yeah. I
Yeah, and
mean,
so
even
you'll be
there,
seeing a little bit
everything
more
has
from
an
us.
app now, right? Like we can all tap into our app and track our carbon footprint. I know that was like a trend a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
Or at my kids' school, they're just like, oh, my carbon footprint is this much.
yeah.
So
Yeah. And, so you'll be just seeing some new innovative ways from us of how we're going to bring this message, not only in conversations like this, or to your point, with just, people that already hold this technical expertise, but really trying to weave that into, work that's already happening in communities.
mhm. Well, I know that you're at the initial stages, right, of this happening, right? And so what is your timeline? And then this is a great way to have you on and then have you back and just say, remember what we talked about?
Yeah.
What happened?
Right, right. I
What
mean, so the timeline, so I will say that this work, all of these projects are coming to a head this year, right? And that's why they're so important, and which is why, we have begun to just engage people in different ways on these projects. Um, so we will continue to do that. And I think the most important thing is like, I went to planning school. I'm an urban planner by training. Um, and I don't want to create another plan. I think that that's always the fear, right? Is that you just create a plan that just collects dust on a shelf somewhere and that's the end of it. And when I say climate action plan, I'm almost even hesitant to use that term plan at the end, right? Because
Mhm.
the intent here is not just to create a document that someone reads and says, oh, great, this is ambitious, this is wonderful, I'm glad to see this as a reference. This is an action roadmap, right? This is a framework. So
Yeah.
there's no timeline on when this ends, right? Because it's ongoing. And I think that the climate planning effort is intended to set new goals and to set a strategy, but then from there we move, right? And we move this work forward. And I think, and as you know, I say this all the time, these conversations are always both informational conversations and recruitment events for me, right? Because we just need to mobilize everyone to get involved in this work. And so there's no end date, right? This is just the moment where we sort of reframe our priorities, where we identify some really important strategies, where we make more thoughtful connections to communities, to really understand their needs, and to lay out what those co-benefits can be. And then from there, we collectively move together.
Yeah, no, I understand about the plan. Once upon a time, when was it, in 2017, 18, I chaired the Living Future Collaborative here in Chicago, and we set out a strategic plan. And yes, I have to go, you know, dust it off, and
Right.
others taking charge of it now. But I thought it was really, really great, and um, why not build a living building in every neighborhood of the city or two? Why not do that? What's stopping us? And if it's stopping us, let's look into it. And I think this is part of the conversation that we're having so that
Yeah.
we can do that. And I feel like, that some of the projects that I've been approached with in Southside communities, working class communities, where historically disenfranchised, but I'm telling you, these people, that they're ready to develop and bring workforce development and do it in a very healthy way. So we're gonna keep on this train. We're not getting off.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angela. Yes, the conversation does continue,
Yes.
and let's look at some benchmarks. If we're not, the plan doesn't end, it just continues, but we can do some actionable benchmarks, and look at how we're doing as a city and really set the example for other cities. Because like
Right.
you mentioned, I always say I feel so lucky to be here in the city with the talent that we have. It's just a great place to be in. And then, this pandemic has opened doors, globally, nationally, to work with other, amazing people on this forefront. So, including you. So, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for pushing us to do stuff.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I mean, I'm so glad to work with you as well, and just really grateful that you're creating spaces for this kind of dialogue, right? I think that these conversations are so important, and I think that this is just really the moment where we need to hear from folks. And so, I know that this is out on Facebook, and I think just creating space for people to comment, to talk about this kind of work, right? To share this conversation, so that we can just continue to talk about this, and the city at least, we are open to hearing feedback, and we'll be creating more outlets and for this type of dialogue to talk about climate, to talk about our clean energy transition. And then, like you said, really working with the network of leaders, the network of visionaries, the network of experts, the folks that are holding us accountable, that are calling for justice and equity in this space. All of those folks we need to work with to be able to put our plan together and to set some really ambitious goals for the city. So this is an important year. This is a super exciting year for us, and will really set a really important framework for how we approach this work in the future. So I'm excited to be a part of it, and really grateful for your partnership and the partnership of so many people that have just said, hey, we're with you, let's go. And it's going to be an exciting time for us as we move forward.
It is. Yeah. So thank you once again, everyone. This is Angela Tovar, Chief Sustainability Officer at the City of Chicago. I am Alicia Ponce, architect at AP Monarch. We design healthy environments. One final announcement, go to our AP Monarch Facebook page, and we are in the middle of a WeBank pitch competition. So for sustainability, WeBank has launched a sustainability pitch competition, and we are in it for sustainability services to building healthy buildings and equitable communities. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, Angela. Have a healthy week. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.